Welcome back to the Happy Saver podcast. I'm Ruth, a personal finance blogger living in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and in this podcast, I chat with a diverse bunch of people. I learn their story and then I condense it down so that you can hear helpful, relatable stories from Kiwis who are sharing their experiences about their personal finance in New Zealand. Thanks for letting me join you on your commute, your walk, your run, or while you get some jobs done around your house. Now, just before I get started this week, Johnny and I would like to say a massive thank you to every single person who clearly must have taken a moment out of their day to vote for us in the New Zealand Podcast Awards, where we actually picked up a silver in the Listener's Choice Award for 2025. We were genuinely blown away to win, and I know from all the emails I received that people clearly like this podcast, but to get that feedback on a national level was absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much for that. Now, righto, on with it. Jennifer emailed me in early 2023. She'd listened to all of my podcasts, knew I was a big advocate for parents teaching their kids to invest, and she had a few questions. But the line that really caught my attention was this. Her then 17 and 19-year-old kids didn't know they had a small amount of money coming their way at 25. She wanted to keep that to herself, and they had zero interest in investing. Well, that kicked off a back and forth over email, and almost 3 years later, here we are. Now, it took a bit of coaxing for her to share her financial story with you and I today, because our conversations went well beyond the how I'm saving for my kids. And when I say I only interview everyday Kiwis, well, I absolutely mean it. Most feel like they couldn't possibly help others because they're still figuring money out themselves. But I disagree. And as you're about to hear, this is a very frank look at how so many couples who think about money very differently are dealing with money today. Jennifer said something in our early December chat that really stuck with me. She thought she was the only one in her position, struggling to make ends meet while trying to get out of debt. Now, I know for a fact that she is not. She is absolutely normal in so many ways. And by sharing what she has today, including the solo financial journey she's on within a happy marriage, I know there will be people listening who see themselves in her story, and hopefully they'll learn from it too. So, without further ado, let's crack on with a message from today's sponsor. When I first started to get interested in understanding where my money came from and went to, I meticulously noted each transaction in a spreadsheet. While a good place to start, I was short on time, and that practice lasted 1 month at best. Enter Pocketsmith. It helped me quickly automate my finances, which saved a ton of time. I like to explain Pocketsmith to people by saying it gave me the data I desperately needed to understand my money. I no longer have to compile that data, it does everything for me. Pocketsmith automates financial management by connecting to your financial institutions, such as your bank, for real-time transaction updates. Plus, it offers budgeting tools, cash flow forecasts, and net worth tracking, thus eliminating the need for manual spreadsheets. Thank goodness. If you want to supercharge your finances with Pocketsmith, have we got a deal for you? Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of Pocketsmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/thehappysaver. That's pocketsmith.com/thehappysaver. Now, I only spoke with Jennifer for this episode. She's 51, married to John, who was 54, and largely uninterested in money. Full stop. They've been together since they were 18 and 21, and they're just about to tick over 30 years of marriage. Now, these are not their real names, and they've chosen to remain completely anonymous, including me not saying exactly where on the Motu they live, and I absolutely respect that. Jennifer grew up as the middle child of 3 in a very small South Island town before moving in her early teens to a bigger South Island town. Now, coincidentally, it's where John and his 2 siblings were born, and it's where Jennifer and John still live today. The first question I always ask is kind of a big one. Did you have a sense of money growing up, whether that be rich, poor, or average? And were there any childhood money moments that really shaped you? Well, both her parents were teachers, the type who worked hard all day and then went to committee meetings and gave back to their community after hours. Their relationship with money was complicated, and it still perplexes her. She remembers being explicitly told, "You never talk about religion, politics, or money. It's very bad manners." They were, and still are, extremely strict on this. She recalls innocently asking, "How much do you guys earn an hour or in a week?" and being shut down. As a kid, she had no idea whether the answer might have been $20, $200, or $2,000. As a child, she thought they were well off, but looking back, she now knows that they probably weren't, even though they bought the best of the best and always presented well. Her mum was a home economics teacher, so they saved in many areas, cooking from scratch, sewing beautiful clothes for the kids. Jennifer had piano, singing, and ballet lessons, and only later did she realise that her grandma had been paying for it all. Although it was never discussed, it seems that despite having two relatively good teaching salaries, her parents spent every single cent that they earned and more. For both her grandmother and her parents, being able to say, "My kids have private lessons," was clearly quite important. There was a solid bit of keeping up with the Joneses going on, even though their income couldn't really sustain the lifestyle. In the late 1980s, when she was about 15, her dad was actually made redundant from his teaching position. They'd moved towns, started new jobs, and it was just a case of last in, first out. She doesn't think they ever financially recovered from this. His teaching qualifications were very niche, and he never got another permanent role. So he pieced together short or long-term relief work, plus random non-teaching jobs just to get by. Fast forward to today, and they are actually in their mid to late 70s and still paying off their mortgage. How much is left? Well, Jennifer still has no idea, despite gently asking. Money is still completely off limits. And over the years, she has had many SOS phone calls asking for money to tide them over to cover an electricity bill, the phone or internet bill, and they promise to pay her back each time, and she just quietly lets it slide or tells them to forget about it. She helps in other subtle ways too, by topping up their freezer or slipping a grocery voucher into a birthday gift, getting firewood delivered for winter, and things like that. And I asked her whether, given she's helping them financially, there might be a chance that she'd be allowed a bit more insight into their situation. Well, the answer is still no. Colonial politeness says you do not discuss money. But she knows they've asked her for help because the bank won't lend to them, and she suspects that they've been drawing down on their mortgage as far as the bank will allow, and are now living on some combination of savings, if they have any, and superannuation. She's gently suggested that they contact budgeting services to see if they qualify for things like rates relief or winter energy payments, but again, they won't discuss it, full stop. It's the sort of situation that really tests the parent-child relationship, and it can put pressure on a marriage too, when one partner is giving money away to support their family. At one point, when Jennifer and John were in dire financial straits themselves and about to miss a mortgage payment, they actually went to her parents as a last resort. The answer was an emphatic no. They didn't have the money, and they implied that she shouldn't have asked. So, the topic of money is fraught, and as her parents age, it's becoming more concerning, but she feels, and is, largely powerless to help them. Now, Jennifer and I are a similar age, and I'm actually fascinated by how people my age navigate money conversations with their own parents. My observation is that the wheels often have to completely fall off before parents will share any detail or, God forbid, hand over any control. Their perception is often that kids are trying to get their hands on their money, but in my experience, this is rare. I personally didn't want to step in during a full-blown crisis, so I actually took a leaf out of Dave Ramsey's playbook with my own mum, and I actually asked her, how can I come alongside you and help you do what you need to do? The focus is on helping her carry out her wishes. It is her money, her decisions, and I just help with the bits that she gets stuck on, like internet banking and paying the bills, and it works well. She feels in control, and my siblings know what I'm doing, so there is no secrecy or misunderstanding. Now, given Jennifer's original email about putting aside money for her kids and not telling them about it, You can see how this reluctance to talk about money was already being passed to the next generation. It's something she's become much more aware of and is now actively working to change, and more on that soon. So, what money belief did she carry for years that turned out to be dead wrong? Well, definitely this one. Regardless of your financial situation, what you earn is what you spend. If you work hard, you deserve to spend it all and live for today. And you don't discuss money with anyone. There's no planning ahead. And if you look like you're doing well, that's 95% of what matters. Well, it took her until her mid-40s to realise how damaging these beliefs were. When Jennifer finished high school, she had grand plans to be a lawyer and she headed off to university. Now, this was the 1990s when student loans turned up in nice big lump sums in your bank account. She remembers being so excited when the money hit her bank, not because it meant she could study, but because she could go and buy a stereo, new clothes, a car, and all the things she couldn't normally afford. She lived with family rent-free, had part-time jobs babysitting and working in a chemist, but with zero financial education from home, it never occurred to her that she might save any of it. She enjoyed the social side of university, but not law. In second year, she enrolled in random papers that sounded interesting, and then she failed many of them before giving up entirely after 2 years. And she left with no qualification, but with a student loan that had been accruing 7 to 8% interest from day one. She couldn't tell me what the final balance was because when the statements arrived, she simply didn't open them. The debt just didn't register for her at all, she said. After university, she worked in a shoe shop, and she remembers chatting with a colleague about their pay and figuring out that her wages were just below the threshold where student loan repayments kicked in, and she genuinely thought she had cracked some kind of life hack. Here I am, getting a full income and not having to give any back. She had no concept that interest was piling up, her debt was growing, and she was actually on a minimum wage. A year or so later, she went back into full-time study, this time in healthcare, after a colleague pointed out that she had the right temperament and skills, and that turned out to be spot on. Healthcare is the profession that she still works in today. By this time, she'd actually been going out with John since she was 18. He was working as a tradie, he drove a flashy muscle car and was a lovely, fun guy to be around. He was the bloke with a wad of cash in his pocket, shouting rounds at the pub. No real discussions about money were had between the two of them because why would there be? When Jennifer was 21, they bought their first house together for $89,000. Now, in today's dollars, according to the Reserve Bank of New Zealand inflation calculator, that would be around $500,000 today. As a bit of a wheeler-dealer, John put one of his vehicles into the deal because the seller fancied it, and they took on a mortgage for the rest. The plan was not uncommon for most Kiwis, to do the house up and sell it. So it was a busy time. He worked full-time, she was studying full-time, plus she worked weekends in a rest home. Both young, both working hard, but both completely oblivious to the potential their money could offer them. They got married when she was 22 and he was 25, and to pay for the wedding and the honeymoon, she didn't even consider saving up cash. They took out a $10,000 personal loan at a higher interest rate than their mortgage, and whānau chipped in as well. Every now and then, she said, she gets a bee in her bonnet about something, and that wedding loan became one of those things. As soon as they were back from the honeymoon, she started making extra payments and knocked it off quickly. And that little glimpse of determination pops up again later in her story. She graduated at the age of 23 with a qualification she enjoyed and could earn good money from. Now, she can't remember the exact number, but she thinks her student loan was around $60,000, and in today's terms, that's roughly $150,000. She had gone to town on that loan, and at work, she and her colleagues discussed their student loan debts, and theirs were far smaller, and, of course, they actually had degrees to show for them. Her balance had been bloated by 2 years of maxed out borrowing with no qualification and compounding interest on top. Now, fast forward to today, her youngest is studying and paying for it using student loans. And with hindsight, Jennifer can see how easily those balances can spiral without guidance. She's now very aware that if she doesn't step in to talk about how student loans actually work, well, her kids could end up in the same mess that she did. And I applaud her for breaking the family rule of we don't talk about money. Now, back in the 1990s, though, John and Jennifer were married with a mortgage, and she had a student loan she didn't understand. Their first house was in a pretty dodgy area, down the road from a gang headquarters with other gang members scattered about the suburb. And after spending about $10,000 doing it up, they sold it in 2002 for $98,000, making no real profit, and extended their mortgage to buy a nicer $139,000 house. It would be about $630,000 in today's money. They are still in that home 23 years later. They made their mortgage payments, and the only advice or commentary she ever heard was that a mortgage was a necessary evil. You'd have it forever. Meanwhile, something else was brewing. John went into business for himself. He was an excellent tradie, he had a great reputation, was well in demand, but they never talked about money, and there was no separation between business and personal finances. And unknown to Jennifer, he borrowed heavily and wasn't paying his taxes. And when it finally surfaced, the bank rolled his business debt into their new mortgage. But because of his IRD debts, they would only lend in Jennifer's name. Her income alone had to be enough to cover the payments. And that pattern of business, debt, crash, consolidation into the mortgage repeated more than once. And I wish I could now tell you that through trial and error, they finally came into perfect alignment financially, but that is not their story. Jennifer describes them as polar opposites with money. They used to be aligned in the sense that neither thought about it at all, but over the years, she started paying very close attention and has tried really hard to bring John on the journey, but it's just not of interest to him, so he remains disengaged. So how best to think about this, I wondered as I wrote this up. Jennifer wants John's support and help, but he won't help. He's a tradie, right? So I've tried to think of it like this. If he was on a building site and a mate called out, "Can you give me a hand holding this ladder?" Well, he wouldn't hesitate. Not because he loves ladders, but because that's what you do on a job site. You all pitch in so the work gets done safely and you don't leave someone struggling alone. And that's exactly what's happening at home. She's trying to sort the mortgage, the car loan that you'll hear about in a minute, the credit cards, learning as she goes, and she just needs someone to steady the ladder. And it's not about becoming an accountant. It's about being on the same team while you build your financial house together. He likes money and he likes to have it, but he has zero interest in looking at it, which frankly I would find incredibly frustrating if I was in her position. But I would never give up trying to work together either. But I digress. Back in the 1990s, there was no internet banking, no easy transparency. He'd go off to work, she'd go off to work, and they'd both just spend what came in. She only discovered the scale of his trouble when she came across an IRD letter stuffed in a drawer. He had no accountant, no proper records, and saw no issue with cashing a cheque, knowing full well it might bounce. He needed money, so he simply found a way to get it. So twice his business failed completely, leaving large debts behind. Each time he'd go back to being an employee. His trade skills were highly sought after, so he always found work, and for a while things would settle. That income would flow, the debt would be tidied away into the mortgage, and life would carry on. But inevitably, he'd be drawn back into business ownership, either coaxed by a client into taking on a big job, or taking over a business from a sick employer. Third time round, Jennifer called time and stepped fully into the financial driver's seat of his business and their personal finances. She took charge of day-to-day accounting, dealings with the bank, and insisted that they work with an accountant together. He'd now been working for himself for 10 years without the financial disasters of the past, thanks to her. Given he'd already failed twice, I was relieved to hear John was very receptive to Jennifer stepping in. There are some people who simply shouldn't run a business because they only want to do the work they love, but paperwork, which they hate, comes as part of the package. He loves the trade. He hates the admin. Yes, you can learn those skills, but some people just won't, and those people need to pay someone who will. Jennifer now keeps a very tight rein over the business finances. John has no credit card. They simply just don't work for him. He uses an EFTPOS card or trade accounts with suppliers that she pays in full each month. He gets a couple of $100 a week to spend however he likes on lunches and bits and pieces, but he cannot draw directly from any business accounts. And that gives Jennifer complete transparency over the business at all times and allows him to focus on the work he does best. Now, while I think it's a real shame that he shows zero interest because it puts a lot of pressure onto Jennifer, I'm sure he recognises the value in his wife protecting him and their family from his own blind spot. And while he sounds like an awesome bloke, he's missing a bit of a trick here as a supportive husband. Now, I asked Jennifer what she'd say to others in a similar situation. She said if your partner is actively hiding financial trouble from you, she really sympathises. Those for her were dark days. But if you discover a mess, you have to get stuck in boots and all. Learn the accounting software, whether that's Xero, Henry, MYOB, whatever they're using. Talk to the bank and the accountant. Look at the accounts every single day and monitor every single transaction. You may have to do what she's done and take full financial control for a time, excluding your partner from money decisions because they simply can't be trusted at that point. Now, given the mortgage was in her name and his business debt had been rolled into her mortgage, I think she had every right. They're financially combined, but with very firm rules that she's put in place. So, what will she tell her daughters about money and relationships, I wondered? If they meet someone and think it might go the distance, she wants them to ask very direct questions about money and to seriously consider ring-fencing their finances. I partly agree with this, and Johnny actually reminded me years later that very early in our relationship, I grilled him about money. I asked him how much he earned, what he spent it on, where he thought his career was headed, and I shared my details too. If I hadn't liked his answers, that would have been that. But it all checked out. And we combined our finances from the start because we were both trustworthy in every sense. To me, financial incompatibility is a huge red flag. Yes, it's hard at 18, as Jennifer was, to think to ask those questions. But if you want a happy marriage, you've got to go there early. And for Johnny and I, with an 18-year-old in our whare these days, we actually just openly talk about what a good relationship looks like so that she knows what red flags to look for herself. Now, I was really pleased to hear that Jennifer now has open money chats with her 2 children. She can throw ideas around with them, share what she's learnt, and hear their perspectives too. But back to the timeline. Well, when her first child was born in 2004, she took 11 months off work. They hadn't planned financially for it, but she had saved for a cot and a pram, but that was about it. She assumed that expenses would go down and they would just live frugally. There was no maths behind it, and they struggled. Once she was back at work, though, things improved. But when their second child arrived 2 years later, they really hit the wall. John wasn't earning quite enough, and customers were very slow to pay. They struggled so much that she asked her parents to help with that mortgage payment and was turned down. So instead, they went to the bank and paused mortgage payments for 3 months. 7 months into what was supposed to be 12 months of maternity leave, she went back to work. Now, each time his business hit trouble, they extended the mortgage to get fast cash to fix the issue. When letters arrived saying interest rates had dropped and her required payments were going down, she'd say yes, and she'd then chuck the letter in the bin, never considering that this was an opportunity to keep payments the same and pay the mortgage off faster. KiwiSaver began in 2007. Jennifer by then was in her early 30s, but she had her blinkers on, she said, and it took till around 2017 for her to join. And when she did, she signed all 4 family members up on the same day, while at the bank, extending the mortgage yet again to pay for house renovations. So, classic Kiwi behaviour, debt for renovations, followed by a casual, oh yeah, I should probably join KiwiSaver. When I asked her what her plan was for paying off the mortgage each time they extended it, her honest answer was that she thought that they would never pay it off, and I guess given her parents still have a mortgage in their 70s, That belief made perfect sense. Her student loan, however, finally came into focus at work when colleagues started talking about paying theirs off faster, especially with a 10% government bonus on voluntary payments around 2009. She started reading her loan letters for the first time, consciously watching the balance, and ramped up extra payments. Now, that period of focus and intentional effort worked, and she cleared it, and she enjoyed the pay rise once her loan deductions finally stopped. Now, hearing about these really focused periods showed me just what she could be capable of if she could just find the right information. Now, during this time, they were also pouring money into their old 1960s home, just as so many of us did. She thought she was being pretty clever by only having one thing on hire purchase at a time instead of saving and paying cash. And a trip to the shops for one item became a trolley full. Multiple trips to the supermarket each week because she wanted to make something specific and there was nothing in the house. Sound familiar? I know it sounds familiar to me. For years, she said, they just limped along. They spent everything they earned, very much like her parents. The difference was that instead of asking the family for money, they used their friendly bank instead. Now, home renovation magazines convinced her that they could keep going. They could fix the genuinely necessary stuff, then make a house a home with all the trimmings. And by 2017, they'd borrowed so much against the house that they owed more than it was worth. And while untangling this with the bank, they added KiwiSaver into the mix, which was at least one good outcome. So they actually ended up with 2 mortgages. One was for the house and one was for the renovation. And when that wasn't enough, they put a new oven, a new fridge, and a ventilation system on 0% finance on a GEM visa. And she genuinely thought that she had nailed it. Now, we all have a financial low point, and Jennifer's came over a $30 meal out with friends. She was midway through her dinner when she checked her bank account and found that she had no money. Those 2 mortgages and the GEM visa payment had just cleared and had cleaned her out. She scrambled around, shifting tiny amounts between accounts, and she managed to cobble together $22. And she remembers her hands shaking as she tried to pay, mentally choosing which friend to ask for help if she was declined. But to her enormous relief, the transaction went through. The bank had just slid her into overdraft. Now, for many, an event like this is a true turning point. But for Jennifer, at the age of 44, it wasn't. And the only lesson she said she took was that she just dodged a bullet and needed to be more careful. And they kept right on meeting their huge debt payments. In 2020, she added one more debt, a $16,000 car on finance. For her, it felt like the right time to upgrade, and she justified it to herself that she could easily have spent more, so $16,000 felt pretty reasonable. Now, if I didn't know what was coming next, I might have wondered, mid-interview, whether I'd picked the wrong person to talk to. But here comes the pivot. Later in 2020, she decided to swap fiction books for non-fiction on Audible. One of the first books that popped up was The Barefoot Investor by Scott Pape. She said it was like a light going on in a part of her brain that had never lit up before. Apart from those earlier bursts of determination around paying off the wedding loan and then the student loan, she'd never had any interest in personal finance as such. But this time, she felt an actual jolt in her chest, that feeling of, I've just discovered something important. She immediately bought the hard copy and got to work setting up her systems. She opened a separate bank account and called it Mojo, which is a type of emergency fund, a completely new concept to her. This happened to coincide with a payout from her employer, thanks to a union agreement, so she actually had a small lump sum to put into that account. For the first time ever, she had money specifically set aside for an emergency, and she has kept it going. From there, she went deep. Books, money podcasts, the lot. A couple of standouts for her were anything by Morgan Housel and J.L. Collins, and she reads or listens to everything they put out and hunts down any podcast that they appear on. Hearing the same core message delivered slightly differently really helped solidify things for her. Now, facing up to your finances means working out where you actually stand. She's a bit fuzzy on the numbers from that exact point in time, but roughly, the GEM visa had been paid off within the 24-month interest-free window. She still had her car loan at 10.5% interest though, and the mortgage was about $260,000. The number felt huge to her, and I think that's because she'd carried debt since the age of 18. Student loans, mortgages, business debt rolled in, more mortgages for repairs, credit cards, car loans. It felt never ending. That old belief that you just stay in debt forever still sat very heavily. If her behaviour and education around money had never changed, her debt would absolutely have continued to grow. Her sense of suffocation was entirely warranted. Something had to change, and that something was her. Now, first on the chopping block was the car loan. She opened a car loan extinguisher bank account, literally just a bank account, and that's the name she gave it. She increased her regular repayments to the maximum that she could afford, and any extra money went into that savings account. Each time the balance hit $1,000, she'd ring up MTF and make an extra payment. The process wasn't easy, but she stuck with it. They charged her a $120 early repayment fee. Nice, huh? But after about 12 months, the car loan was gone, and then she stopped the automatic payment and closed the loan. And here's the behavioural shift that tells you her thinking has changed. She immediately opened a new car sinking fund to save up for her next car. She has no idea when she'll need one, but she knows cars die eventually. She started with tiny contributions while focusing on other debts and then increased it to $50 a week, and it currently has about $600 in it. Behaviourally, this is huge. She sees that line in her banking app and knows that she'll never have a car loan again. Instead of paying interest and stupid early repayment fees, she'll earn it and eventually pay cash. Once the car loan was gone, the ANZ mortgage remained. It was on fixed terms, so she couldn't just throw extra at it whenever she liked. Until the fixed periods ended, she used the same strategy, a mortgage fire extinguisher account, squirreling away extra money until she had $1,000, then sitting on the phone on hold with the bank to make a lump sum payment. When her fixed terms finally ended, she changed tactics. After hearing Mary Holm on Radio New Zealand talk about laddering mortgages, she went into her bank absolutely prepared. She told the mortgage specialist she was in a hurry to get out of debt and she wanted to split the mortgage into several parts, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, plus she wanted $40,000 on a 1-year floating rate. She looked into offset accounts and revolving credits, but felt, and I completely agree, that for many people, those structures overcomplicate a simple problem. You are in debt and you just need to pay it off. Chopping it up and complicating it often makes you feel like you are doing something when you are not. Her initial plan was to make minimum payments on the 3 fixed portions and just pour everything extra into the floating $40,000. And each payday, she'd allocate money, rinse and repeat every fortnight. When she emailed me in early 2023, her mortgage was down to $186,000. Her goal was to be mortgage-free by 2028 at the age of 53. Now, I told her that I liked her plan, but I actually also challenged her to see if she could beat it. For me, after years of talking to people who are paying off debt like their hair is on fire, I've noticed that they almost always get there faster than planned. She sounded like one of those people, and I asked whether she had the ability to work more, earn more, and throw more at the debt, and that planted the seed. From her emails, I'd actually assumed that she was a single parent. So when we actually spoke on the phone for this interview, I was very curious to hear what role John was playing in all of this. As it turned out, they were living off John's $1,100 weekly income and throwing as much of her $1,500 weekly income as possible at the mortgage. But it was only Jennifer who was fully engaged in the process. So their combined take-home pay was about $2,600 per week, and they had a family to run and one particularly expensive habit in the mix. John's $55 a pack a day smoking habit. She said of that smoking cost, some things you just have to endure. And watching hard-earned cash being burnt, literally, is just one of them. And my mum smoked for 30 plus years, and I remember the arguments about it, but nothing anyone said made a difference until she decided to stop. And eventually, thankfully, she did, much to our relief. But as anyone who loves a smoker knows, addiction is powerful. So she focused on some expenses that she could control. They dropped both of their health insurance. Premiums for a smoker in their 50s meant that they were actually heading towards $1,000 a month, which was unaffordable. And they also cancelled their life insurance, which was a risk given they were in debt. But once you're debt-free, life insurance becomes less crucial. And I actually encourage Jennifer to still consider some basic health cover just for herself if she can. And they also cut Sky back from 2 rooms to just 1 at $115 a month. Now, personal finance is personal. We all have to make trade-offs about where our money goes. Now, back to that seed I planted about income. Jennifer went out and got a second job, casual shifts with a different employer that she could pick up when it suited. Every cent from that job also went to the floating portion of the mortgage, and once that $40,000 was cleared, she returned to building up her mortgage extinguisher bank account and dumping $1,000 lump sum payments on the fixed portions, waiting until the terms rolled over. Between extra work and some work bonuses, the debt started shifting far faster than she'd believed possible. She paid off that initial $40,000 by June and had to wait until October for the next renegotiation. She got sick of the constant back and forth and eventually paid the break fees to rework the mortgage structure again. Interest rates were climbing, so she sometimes paid penalties for breaking fixed terms, but by then she was throwing so much at the mortgage that the rate became less important than just getting rid of it. And with each email update that she sent me, her language became more focused and much more determined. She had a system and it worked, and she emailed me saying, "I feel pretty excited and I think I'm going to smash this goal." And I told her that mindset is exactly what gets people over the line, and again said that people like her almost always get there ahead of schedule. In about 18 months, she had actually paid off roughly $70,000. She'd switched her strategy up, so she was now paying the maximum possible on each fixed chunk without incurring penalties, smashing out another floating portion, then went back to saving lump sums ready to pounce at the next rollover. And her mindset had shifted to always thinking ahead, planning, guessing, adjusting, and then beating her own predictions, which spurred her on further. In October 2024, the remaining mortgage was $83,000. Throughout 2025, she kept the pressure on, ratcheting payments up whenever she could. With $20,000 remaining, she was actually offered a new job, slightly higher income, great prospects. And she drew a line in the sand that this job would mark the final sprint to debt freedom. She said to me, "The last few years have not been easy. She's gone without a lot. No haircut in 2.5 years. Her daughter took that over. She avoided the dentist. She took no holidays. She bought clothes secondhand. If something broke, it stayed broken. Apart from a few non-negotiable expenses, they lived very frugally. And with both daughters leaving home and all extracurricular costs disappearing, they freed up thousands more each year. She just kept pushing. And for the final $20,000, she pushed even harder. Her Mojo emergency fund target had been $16,000, which was 4 months of expenses. She decided to cap it at the $15,000 it was at and direct everything else to the mortgage. And I was delighted to hear that she kept that emergency fund intact the whole way through. She paused birthday and Christmas giving, she stopped contributions to the future car fund and future solar panels, and she drained her other sinking funds for electronics, for holidays, for health, throwing every available cent at the debt. Until in November of 2025, I received one of my favourite types of emails. After 33 years of being in debt of some form or other, she was 100% debt-free, ahead of schedule as I predicted. Now, how did it feel to make that last payment? She said it felt incredible, like a huge, heavy weight had been lifted from her. She described it as though there had always been a hum or a static in the background of her life, and someone had finally flicked the switch to off. All those constant mental calculations, the power bill's coming, move this here, remember to shift that there, they were all gone. In the days leading up to that final payment, she actually tried to make one last lump sum payment from her fire extinguisher bank account onto the final part of the mortgage, and she spent over an hour on the phone with the bank and was told that she couldn't pay the last $1,400 that way. She said it pretty much summed up exactly why she was so happy to never have to deal with that bank in that way again, being blocked from putting her own money on her own debt. Now, in 2026, she plans to go against advice from both her lawyer and her bank and pay the $400 and formally discharge the mortgage. Their advice is exactly the same that I was given years ago. Keep the facility open just in case you decide to go back into debt. That is the bank's goals talking, not yours. I've been debt-free nearly 20 years now, and I have zero regrets. The morning after the final payment, she logged in and saw the balance at zero. Gone. She took screenshots, something that she now strongly recommends to you and I, because once a debt disappears, so does most of that banking history. And those screenshots are a really powerful reminder of how far you've come and how hard you've worked. They help you really feel what you've achieved, she said. Now, one of her earliest emails to me said, no one else is excited about this plan, so I would love to contact you every now and then so I can be excited about my milestones with someone else. Hopefully that's okay with you, Ruth. Well, that is more than okay. I get such a thrill from seeing people see their plans through. And yes, I do often shed a wee tear over my keyboard when I see people reach their goals. So what is the lay of the land now? Their net worth is close to $850,000. The house is worth about $680,000, and she feels strongly that they are in the right place and in the right size home for them, so they've got no plans to move. They have around $22,000 invested with Sharesies, and I'll circle back to that shortly. Her KiwiSaver is in a Simplicity High Growth Fund at about $100,000. She's been contributing 4% of her pay for 8 years, plus getting 3% from her employer. Regular, boring contributions add up. John's KiwiSaver, on the other hand, sits at about $23,000 because he only pays around $20 a week into it. As a self-employed person, it's far easier to ignore, hence the widening gap in KiwiSaver balances between the self-employed and the PAYE workforce. And my thoughts on this is that if you don't want to use KiwiSaver, you have to find another way to invest so that you still have a nest egg awaiting you in retirement. Now, they also keep cash spread across those various sinking funds, including their emergency fund. With most of their wealth tied up in the house, her focus is now shifting to investing for retirement. She has become so used to sending big chunks of money to the mortgage that it's been a relatively simple switch to start investing. Right now, she's putting $500 each week into the Smart Total World Fund via Sharesies. Yes, it's certainly not the cheapest platform to use, and she may change providers in time, but it's been easy to use and it's done a lot for her financial education along the way. She's also spending the next few months leveling up all the categories that have been neglected while she's sprinted to debt freedom, and once done, she will divert more money to investments. All the sinking funds for the car, the electronics, the health, the holidays, the future solar panels are now getting regular contributions again. And she's already paid $8,000 cash to replace 2 heat pumps that died mid-get-out-of-debt journey. And it would be very easy now to be lured back into debt. Banks will quite happily re-lend to people who are good payers. They want you to keep borrowing. No one takes on their first debt imagining that decades later they'll have layered debt upon debt because life happened to them. If you don't know there's an alternative, you just keep reaching for the same tool, borrowed money. At one point, ANZ actually offered them a 1% interest loan for solar panels, and she had seriously considered it. Today, no way. She is completely done with debt. Hallelujah to that. But did she reward herself for all her mahi? Well, yes, she did, but not in the way you might expect. She still hasn't been to a hairdresser because her youngest daughter has become excellent at cutting her hair. But she did buy herself a beautiful new dining suite for $3,000, and every time she looks at it, she thinks, well, isn't that pretty? She also replaced a coffee table and a few other functional household items. But I think most crucially, she got her time back. She resigned from her second job. It had served its purpose. It was physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausting, and she always knew it was for a short, intense period. She's now in a new main job with slightly higher income of about $1,560 a week and the potential for growth in time. So after taking a moment to breathe, hopefully while sitting at that lovely new table with a cuppa, she's made this smooth shift from paying interest to earning it. Now, remember that first email back in early 2023? Her original question was about investing for her 2 children. Since they were born, she'd been saving $5, then $10, then $20 a week into a savings account and then into a term deposit. She imagined it would eventually fund their university studies. In 2021, she moved their then $7,000 each into Sharesies, following a mix of, quote, recommended kids investments. Now, she watched them dip below her starting point, and she wrote to me and she said, now, I do understand that the share market is volatile, but should I be expecting no returns? Then she said she just read The Simple Path to Wealth and was considering a US 500 or a Total World Fund instead. Then she added that the girls didn't know about the money and she was worried that they'd treat it as a spend now money account and wanted to keep it quiet until they were more mature. Well, in my email, I got straight to the point. If she'd read The Simple Path to Wealth, she already knew the answer about which fund to pick. J.L. Collins makes a very strong case for just a broad market index fund that buys either all of the US or the whole wide world. But what really jumped out to me was this. She was new to investing herself at the age of 46 and was trying to shield her daughters from this money in case they blew it. If you keep them out of the loop, of course they will treat it like a windfall when you finally reveal it. They'll have no context for where it came from or how it even grew. She only learned this stuff in her mid-40s. Imagine the gift of helping them learn it at 17 and 19. I strongly encouraged her to bring them into this process. They don't get to spend it, but they must learn how it works. Otherwise, when they one day inherit it, they could easily blow it, just like adults who inherit money all at once do with no financial education. Now, we've invested, Johnny and I, for our daughter since birth and always told her what we were doing and why. She's now 18, investing for herself. Actually, she has just taken over full responsibility of her own Sharesies account and fully understands how long it takes to build wealth. The money in her account didn't appear there by accident. It took years for her to grow it. More importantly, she understands that invested money makes money and that encourages her to continue to invest. Teaching our kids about money while they're still at home or still young enough to listen is crucial in my view. If we don't, well, the banks, the lenders, and their peers will teach them instead, because that's exactly how Jennifer learned herself. And she emailed me back saying, oh my God, you are so right. I didn't think about the money lessons a small amount of investment could provide my kids. Well, she mulled it over for 24 hours, then sat them down and told them about the investments and how she had scrimped and saved, sometimes just $5 a week, even when she wasn't sure how the mortgage would be paid. The reaction from her teens was typically teenage, pretty underwhelming, because having not lived it themselves, they genuinely had no concept of the work put in by their mum. But the important thing is that the conversation has now started. She took J.L. Collins' advice and moved the money into a smart Total World Fund, and throughout her mortgage payoff journey, she kept investing a little each week, $20 each for the girls, $50 for herself. And now that she's debt-free, she's increased the girls to $50 each and is contributing, like I said, $500 a week for herself. And she's aiming for an investment rate of about 33% of her own take-home pay. She knows that a large chunk of her and John's net worth sits in their house, but now, at the age of 51, her plan is to steadily build up investments, real income-producing assets, to set them both up for retirement. To educate herself, she found resources that were not trying to sell her anything, and she recently completed the free Rebel Finance School online course, which she absolutely loved. It's reinforced her confidence in using a Total World fund each week. And she said to me, "I feel confident in my choice, no stress at all," she said, which is music to my ears. She also started using Pocketsmith on my recommendation, and it's given her a few shocks, especially around dining out and small, frequent spends that really add up, but it's helping her really see where her money goes each month. So while sprinting at the mortgage, she kept groceries to about $250 a week for 2 adults, 2 dogs, and 2 girls who pop back 2 to 3 nights a week. But now that the debt is gone, she's relaxed that up to around $290 a week. Learning Pocketsmith remains a work in progress, but it's so worth sticking with it for the information it tells you about yourself. Now, this is a long episode, as ever, but she's so interesting. But I'm almost done, but before I finish up, I have another message from today's sponsor. If your finances are holding you back from living the life you want, try Pocketsmith out. They've got the tools to help you make money management easier. And have we got a deal for you? Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of Pocketsmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/thehappysaver. That's pocketsmith.com/thehappysaver. Now, as we wrap up, those of you who've been listening for a while will know that I couldn't resist circling back to John. His attitude really stayed with me. What's going on there? He knew Jennifer was working incredibly hard to pay off their mortgage. She told him that. She invited him to be part of the process. She asked for his help, and still he clung to repeating, "Well, I'm just not that interested in money." When one partner is trying hard to sort out the money while the other avoids engaging, there's often a huge emotional load sitting on just one set of shoulders, in this case, Jennifer's. It's tiring, it's lonely, and it can feel like carrying the whole financial future of the whānau by yourself. But avoidance is really about not caring. More often, it's embarrassment, overwhelm, or a bit of fear, because facing the numbers means facing the consequences. Or it may simply be that he trusts her fully and can't see what benefit he could bring. Understanding that can soften the conversation. Instead of seeing your partner as uninterested, you just have to keep searching for that on-ramp to get them interested and involved. It's never about perfection. It's about becoming a team again, as I'm sure they are in other aspects of their lives together. But their reality was that off he went to his job, while she headed to her first job, then her second, then home to do all the bookkeeping for his business. Yet the indifference remained. I can't help but feel he's missed something. He doesn't seem to realise he's married to an absolute freaking superstar. If he chooses not to acknowledge that, well, that's on him. However, there is the next generation to consider. So to Jennifer's girls, if you're listening, which I hope you are, your mum is an absolute hero, truly, and she needs you. She's still unlearning that we don't talk about money belief, and she's loving the conversations the three of you are beginning to share. When she finally paid off the mortgage, she didn't even tell John immediately. She waited, thinking that maybe he'd notice or ask. He didn't. Instead, she turned to her daughters, she opened up her laptop, and she showed them their Sheezy's accounts on that particular week. And it was during one of those chats that she shared that she had paid off the mortgage. And one child asked, "Well, does Dad know?" Well, he didn't. So off they went and told him. And his response was, full credit to Jennifer, she was the one who did it. He was pleased, and that was that. Maybe he's just a man of few words. Hence her email to me for a bit more of a whoop whoop reply, which she absolutely got. Will she tell her parents? Absolutely not. Her siblings? No. But unless we push back against this whole "it's rude to talk about money" thing, we'll keep repeating the same mistakes, and our kids will repeat ours. This is why I just feel so strongly that we must talk to our tamariki about money while they're at home. If we don't, the banks, the lenders, and ill-informed peers will. Jennifer now has a wonderful opportunity to learn alongside her daughters, with 3 heads being better than 1. I suspect each of them will teach the others something valuable. So to her girls, 2 hardworking young women already navigating student loans and working, keep those money and life conversations going with whomever you meet. Talk while one of you is cutting your mum's hair, or when you pop in for dinner, or while you're out walking together. Nothing is off limits. Just as your mum has questioned and learned from me, from books and podcasts, you can learn from her and with her. She spent decades discovering what doesn't work, and now she knows what does. So ask her about it. Read the book she recommends, listen to the podcast that she sends to you. This is knowledge she desperately wishes she'd had earlier. So as we wrap up our conversation, I asked Jennifer whether anything, financially speaking, still keeps her awake at night. And she paused and reflected and she said, nope, not anymore. And I can't tell you how good it was to hear that. She told me she spent most of her life in financial ignorance, and she is disappointed in herself that she didn't seek information earlier, that it took until the age of 46 to become interested. Now, I really encouraged her to just let that go. Look at what she's achieved in under 5 freaking years. The habits she has built, the mindset she now has, they're all pointing in the same direction, and that is towards increasing financial strength and confidence. And to me, it is a remarkable turnaround. So finally, this particular episode meant a lot to me. I invested a lot of time to craft this episode to eloquently and respectfully share the realities of what is a relatively common marital scenario. And Jennifer, I hope I have represented you well. Thank you so very much for sharing your journey with me. I just know that there will be men and women listening who appreciate the fact that you did. So that is all from me this week, and this is the last episode for 2025, but I will be back in 2026. If you want to get in touch, you know where you can find me over at thehappysaver.com. And please do share my podcast and my blog with your friends. It's still the best way that I can help other people learn something new about their money. And finally, I would love it if you would talk more about money with your own friends and whānau and help me continue to help others be better with money. So until next time, happy saving.